Spoiler alert. The ocean may not be where the first spark of life occurred. It's a controversy that has raged for centuries, but there's evidence to suggest that life's journey, the origin of all living things, including us, began here, smoldering, bubbling, volcanic mud pots. The clue comes from the fluid in the cells of all living things. Modern cells can pump out sodium to get the levels right, but the earliest cells couldn't. They must have been in a low-sodium environment, which is not the sea. So it's likely that life began here. Steam gushing from volcanic heat underground throws up mineral-rich mud, deposited as the steam condenses. Periods of drying and exposure to UV from the sun might both have played a role in enabling cells to form. This primordial laboratory finally stirred up the right ingredients under the right conditions to first spark life. A breakthrough that occurred somewhere between 4.3 and 3.8 billion years ago. Today, mud pots are hostile places for life, strongly acidic. But back in the day, there was less oxygen in the air, which prevented the formation of sulfuric acid. It's likely that life got its jumpstart on small volcanic landmasses, where rain fell and gathered in pools that were heated by geothermal activity. It was here that everything came together for us and the rest of life on Earth. Some prefer the theory of life beginning in deep-sea thermal vents. On sea or land, it's fairly certain that water and warmth were involved. But it was in the sea that the first great experiments occurred, transforming those first single cells into the spectacular diversity that is life. However, Project Life was a slow burner. The Earth was a turbulent place. Back then, the moon was closer to us, its gravitational pull causing huge tides, and all the while, the planet was tormented by hurricanes and volcanic activity. But gently buffered beneath the waves, life had a chance to slowly develop. It wasn't quick. Not much changed for about 1 billion years, but then it's thought that the first photosynthesis might have taken place. Cyanobacteria, some of the earliest life forms, started photosynthesizing, and a byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen. So these early life forms released oxygen from water, laying the foundations for the atmosphere that supports us now. Another 1 billion years later still, complex cells, the eukaryotes, evolved. The first cells with a nucleus. A whopping 3,500 million years ago, bacteria branched out. This is the last time that all life shared a common ancestor. Fast forward another 1 billion years, and the first multicellular life forms appear. And finally, 600 million years ago, 4 billion years after that first spark, the earliest simple animals were swimming in the oceans. It's hard to believe that these laid the foundations for all life. But even our own family tree shares these humble beginnings. Life is a story with a slow start, but from here on in, there has been an unending arms race, with life fighting for resources. Species using innovations in evolution to outdo their peers, competing and conquering, that has led to the spectacular diversity we enjoy today. To catch a glimpse of what those early life forms looked like, we can still marvel at the micro-aliens, single-celled organisms that still drift with the plankton. 550 million years ago, animals were becoming more complex and recognizable. Arguably, the first of the modern groups of animals to branch off and evolve were sponges. Simple creatures without nervous, circulatory, or digestive systems. Other creatures were picking up the pace. Comb jellies. To begin with, all life had to synthesize food from light and minerals. But now, there were tiny organisms. There was something larger animals could eat. Comb jellies got their name from the row of hairs, or cilia, that waft, propelling them through the water. They were among the first predators on the planet, wafting their way to engulf tiny zooplankton, which are digested by enzymes and absorbed. Though most are tiny, some sea combs can be more than a meter long and are the largest creatures to use cilia to swim. A similar level of complexity developed in another group of recognizable animals that evolved soon after, the sea anemones. From the shallow coast to 10,000 meters below the surface, sea anemones make a living by anchoring themselves to the seabed. A mouth at the top of the body is surrounded by a flower-like array of wafting petals. Tentacles armed for attack. Each is covered in nematocysts, microscopic stinging cells that work like mini harpoons, injecting paralyzing toxins into their prey. When they were starting out, prey was tiny and delicate. But sea anemones were armed and ready as bigger prey evolved. It was clearly a working design, as the colorful creatures are still abundant 550 million years later. There were other related predators evolving that were to become defining features of the ocean that we cherish today. Like sea anemones, corals are tiny predatory polyps, but these ones live in colonies. Like sea anemones, they have tiny stinging tentacles that can ensnare prey. But they also team up with photosynthesizing plankton that live inside them, enjoying the protection of the larger body, and in return, producing food from sunlight to feed the coral. Each polyp secretes a calcium carbonate shell. As the colony grows, new polyps settle over old ones, laying down their shells that gradually amass, building enormous reefs. The tiny, ancient animals built structures that other species would be able to inhabit and exploit. It was not long before other major animal groups emerged. Thanks to their hard shells, echinoderms are well represented in the fossil record. Sea urchins were more mobile than their early contemporaries, using tubular feet to meander slowly across the seabed. They are mostly grazers, nibbling on algae, though will chow down on slow-moving creatures given the chance. These are the armored tanks of the ancient seas. Their bodies have a 5-segment shell, which is covered with movable spines, earning them the name urchin or sea hedgehog. The 5-fold symmetry of their shells can be seen more clearly in close cousins, much loved, yet surprisingly predatory sea creatures that were among the first to roam. Starfish. Appearing around 450 million years ago, starfish are tiny terrors. With reinforced skin to protect their bodies, they prowl on hundreds of tiny tube feet. The little limbs are hydraulic, powered by the pressure of the liquid within. Each of the legs has sensors and an eye spot to help guide it to food. Not quite a lion hunt on the Serengeti. The predatory ways of the starfish play out in slow motion as they creep in and smother their prey. The starfish can invert its stomach out through its mouth to secrete enzymes and digest the prey. There were other echinoderms back then that are still around today. Weird and wonderful forms, like brittle stars and sea cucumbers. But up to this point, there were no creatures with legs. The pioneers of Pedis were arthropods, meaning jointed legs. Unlike soft-bodied beasts that had gone before, these new warriors secreted bioarmor, exoskeletons that not only protected their bodies, but were jointed and could move with them. The innovation would give rise to the most abundant species today: insects, myriapods, arachnids, and crustaceans. No one is too sure quite what the first arthropods looked like, but they quickly diversified. Trilobites were a widespread and successful group, but one that was doomed to fail. They have gone, though they looked and lived somewhat like horseshoe crabs that endure today. Later groups would innovate in new ways, by taking their first steps into a world above the waves. But in the oceans, another group was to rise to fame: the crustaceans. More than 500 million years ago, there were already shrimp-like creatures, and they were soon to radiate and grow. A glimpse of those early ancestors can be found in the freshwater ponds of Europe and the Middle East. Triops, or tadpole shrimps, are often considered living fossils, unchanged since the Triassic period, the dawn of the dinosaurs, some 240 million years ago. The tiny creatures are tough. Their eggs can weather droughts and temperature extremes, ideal for the volatile world in which they evolved. These early shrimps were fast-tracked to success. Crustaceans were really upping the game in terms of being dynamic, complex, active and mobile animals. They breed sexually and release millions of eggs into the water that mature in the plankton. As they grow, they shed their skins until large and heavily armored. Ever adaptable, they can be passive filter feeders, grazers, scavengers, and predators, occupying most of the available niches of their time. There was another group emerging beside them, also experimenting with armor, but in a different way. Mollusks, the shellfish, mussels, clams, slugs, and snails. The first blueprints developed by this group included the slimy foot, with muscles pulsing, allowing it to slide along, and a unique, rasping tongue. The muscular, soft bodies of these creatures were vulnerable to the ever-growing number of predators, and so they secreted calcium carbonate shells, often preserved in the fossil record and among nature's most beautiful artworks. The shells can be single structures, carried aloft as a mobile home, while their owners browse, typical for the huge variety of snails. Or might be in two parts and hinged, like in clams and mussels, providing complete protection when danger looms. Because mollusks evolved early and made hard shells, they are well represented in the fossil record and have made a useful tool for geologists to age rocks and chart the history of life on Earth. They dominated ancient seas, and today remain one of the most diverse groups of animals, with nearly 100,000 species described. Most are algae munchers or plankton filterers. After sensing a washed-up jellyfish, these plough snails storm the beach, using their large feet to ride the waves. With tubular mouths, they can probe and suck up the corpse. Shellfish are not the most dynamic animals, taking their time to get around. But there's another ancient branch of the mollusk family to perform a radical gear change. They started out as shelled crawlers of the seafloor, but gradually left it behind. Shelled squid, like ammonites and belemnites, dominated ancient seas. They lasted for hundreds of millions of years, but vanished during the extinction that finished off the dinosaurs. However, their cousins survived. Squid and cuttlefish lost their external shells. Instead, they have a stiff rod inside to support their bodies. Today their size ranges from bee to bus. The cephalopods are the most complex and intelligent of all invertebrates today. They were the first truly fast and dynamic predators in the ocean, capable of hunting down any of their contemporaries. But things were to change with another vital branch of the family tree. The chordates had arrived. At first, they didn't look very impressive. They were still simple creatures, like these sea squirts. But these are our ancestors, the first step of the ladder towards the rise of the vertebrates. Though simple and sessile, just siphoning water to bring in nutrients and take out waste, their juveniles are mobile and, crucially, contain a notochord, the beginnings of a spine, and a sign of things to come. Chordates first appeared during a time known as the Cambrian explosion, and it was aptly named, because 541 million years ago, the world suddenly saw a huge increase in the diversity of life. No one is certain what triggered this boom in evolution. The oxygen levels had increased dramatically thanks to the first plants that were slowly colonizing the land. The atmosphere was more complete. But also, as the range of organisms increased, so did the competition between them. And as the predator-prey relationship grew more complex, an arms race got underway. A pressure that can promote evolutionary innovation and the next big leap, a spinal cord. This is where our own family tree branched off, leaving behind all the crustaceans, mollusks, and other creatures that had come before. And it all happened in the ocean. The first backboned animals were jawless fish, like the bizarre hagfish. Like all of the complex creatures that had gone before them, these animals breathe through gills. But these jawless fish were quickly followed by two other groups that were to go on to dominate the seas. The world was entering a period of geological time known as the Devonian, the Age of Fish. By 419 million years ago, the jawless fish had given rise to three new families. Placoderms were a hugely successful but short-lived group of armored fish that became giant, but were lost to the fossil record. The other two groups remain extremely abundant and familiar. The biggest group of vertebrates, our branch of the animal kingdom, are the osteichthyes, the bony fish. And this is when they came into being, the first of the true vertebrates. It's thought bony fish may have evolved in fresh water. Early species might have resembled modern lungfish. And like lungfish, they had primitive lungs, adaptations to cope in environments where water levels fluctuated, so that they were capable of gulping air. Most fish no longer have lungs, but the primitive ancestral lungs became something just as important, a swim bladder, a sac into which the fish can vary the pressure of gases to aid its buoyancy. It means that at any depth, the fish can control its buoyancy without wasting energy. Located in the upper part of the fish, it also helps to keep the body the right way up. From the Devonian, the fish have gone through endless changes and spectacular diversification. Evolution has driven succession of fish design, new advantages giving some kinds the edge over their ancestors and enabling them to outcompete and replace them. Thanks to the endless variation and drive to find and conquer new niches, there are currently 23,000 species of fish in glorious diversity which have conquered pretty much every aquatic habitat on Earth. From rivers and lakes to tropical reefs and polar ice caps, they can range from small fry, just a few millimeters long, to truly giant, like the bizarre ocean sunfish, the heaviest of all, weighing as much as a rhino. One of the most derived forms, with no tail, just a little pulsing ribbon and huge fins above and below, spanning 4 meters across. Amazingly, the giant fish sustain themselves mostly on jellyfish. Somehow, they are still able to bulk up on this low-calorie diet, going from microscopic hatchlings to ocean giants in just a few years. Fish can occupy every trophic level, meaning every stage of the food chain. From grazing on seaweed and algae, to being dynamic hunters, or scavengers of the dead. While they became some of the most abundant, dominant creatures in the sea, they were not the only group of fish to rise to fame. The chondrichthyes, the sharks and rays, are defined by a cartilage skeleton, but how and why remains something of an enigma. It was always thought that the chondrichthyes must have branched off before early fish developed bone skeletons. But new research and the discovery of a fossil has turned this on its head. It shows that 400 million years ago, vertebrates, fish with bony skeletons, were well established, but that one group lost the ability to produce bone, using lightweight, flexible cartilage instead. They established blueprints that were to go unchanged and unchallenged as some of the planet's most successful animals. Some remain bizarrely primitive in their appearance. Chimeras branched off about 400 million years ago, becoming widespread and abundant. The ancient creatures were complex and highly evolved. At this time, plants were only just appearing on Earth. Chimeras were leagues ahead. The odd ocean dwellers are sometimes called ratfish for their tapered tails and goofy faces. Their faux rodent beady eyes seem to glow green, but are adaptations to hunting in the dark. With jaws fused to their skulls and with permanent tooth plates for grinding food, they are distinct from their cousins. Gates and rays are the relatives that look like they have been run over, but as is characteristic for their clan, they use electroreceptors, little jelly-filled paws on their heads to sense the movements of prey. With eyes above to watch out for danger, they are dependent on the sensory organs on the lower part of their face to home in. Rays' fins are enlarged and flattened, wings to help them glide through the water. The graceful giants seem benign compared to their dynamic kin, the most famous masters of the ocean. The sharks. The streamlined, torpedo-shaped fish are also guided by electroreceptors, not only to sense prey, but perhaps also detecting currents, temperature changes, and even the Earth's magnetic fields, allowing ocean wanderers to travel over huge distances. Sharks have been on Earth longer than trees have, first emerging 450 million years ago. There are some species still living today that are unchanged from fossilized animals that swam the oceans 200 million years ago. Since they first appeared, there have been 5 mass extinctions, each of which devastated life on Earth, including the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. And yet, sharks endure. Today, they are top predators in the ocean. More than 400 species roam, from the smallest that could fit in a pencil case to the biggest, longer than a bus. The whale shark is the biggest fish on Earth, 14 tons of power, and yet feeding on the smallest creatures in the sea. Like the equally daunting basking shark, it sustains its colossal bulk by sifting plankton from the sea. These giant filter feeders first appeared in the Cretaceous period, but it was before that, during the Jurassic, the age of the dinosaurs, that sharks really made leaps in evolution that we'd recognize today. Unlike most bony fish, sharks retained a tail shape that is asymmetrical, with the upper lobe much longer than the lower one. Why isn't well known, but the design may help sharks in an energy-efficient horizontal glide. Their jaws became more flexible, so they could be pushed forwards to stab in and rake their serrated teeth into their prey. Their teeth are like steak knives to slice through muscle fiber. Unlike bony fish, they don't have a swim bladder to help regulate their buoyancy. They might be aided by their lightweight cartilage skeletons. To compensate, they have huge livers filled with oil called squalene. The giant organs can make up 30% of their mass. A basking shark's liver can weigh a ton. As they moved into new territories, new traits evolved, some truly spectacular. Those sharks are all immediately recognizable and have been for millions of years. Their form supports some truly weird variation, 360 degrees. All sharks and rays are united by rough skin. It's covered in tooth-like scales called denticles. It helps to create a foil, reducing drag as the shark glides through the water. And of course, sharks have their famous dentition. To make sure they always have a mouthful of sharp teeth, sharks constantly shed old teeth, replaced by new ones. A single shark can get through 35,000 teeth in a lifetime. Sharks have a winning formula. They have been around longer than most animals and have nearly 500 million years of experience under their belt. So for more than 4 million years, the fish have dominated the seas, becoming some of the most beautiful and diverse forms of life. Fish have been long assumed to be cold-blooded creatures, and most are. But some of the larger species have blurred the boundaries between warm and cold-blooded animals. Giants like sharks and the powerful and dynamic tuna have massive muscles that generate heat while they work. And their huge bodies retain the warmth, making them considerably warmer than their surroundings, adding to their power and speed. With the evolution of these impressive beasts, life in the seas was really hotting up. Something even warmer-bodied was to come. But that's a different story. There is an interesting lesson to learn about the origins of life in the sea. It was always assumed that evolution was driven by competition, species outcompeting their predecessors. But the latest research suggests that those elements that combined to create living cells were not competing, but collaborating. Perhaps we should no longer think about evolution as competing, but sharing innovation. It might suggest that our own future on the planet is dependent on collaborating with, rather than dominating the other creatures that share this planet. Rewind back another 300 million years, and there was another innovative step being taken by a group of fish. Perhaps a small step for fish, but a giant leap for life, and another stride towards our own place on the planet. It was to be the start of a new chapter of life on Earth.